Imagine this. You are the supreme leader of your own island nation, known as your land. As the supreme leader of your people, you have numerous responsibilities to look after them, lest you be dethroned. Your people come to you and say,
"My lord, we're freezing out here. Please, give us some heating."
Sadly, it would take you years to build some proper renewable energy infrastructure, and this winter looks like it's going to be brutal. Oh, but what's this? Right next to your land is none other than the Islamic Caliphate of Hexagon. Neighbor, I see you're in dire need of some energy. Me and my people have such an abundance. Would you like to make a trade? The Caliph offers you a generous deal. Gas, water, and electricity in large amounts, instantly, for a very decent price. So what do you say, neighbor? Are you interested? Of course you are. Wonderful. I'll send it right over. And with that, the Caliph sends over large amounts of energy for your people to enjoy. And how grateful they are.
"Me lord, thanks so much for the heating. We won't freeze after all. Yay!"
But unfortunately, a leader's problems never end, as it wouldn't be too long until another issue came to light.
"Me lord, we are starving. Please, find us some food."
Sadly, it would take years to develop the farmland required for your people to use. Oh, but what's this? Your other neighbours, the Christian Kingdom of Hexagon, have come to pay you a visit. Neighbour, I hear that you have a shortage of food. My people have such an abundance. Would you like to make a trade? The Pope offers you an equally generous deal, a huge amount of food for a relatively cheap price. So what do you say, neighbour? Feeling peckish? Of course you are. Wonderful, just what I thought. I'll send some your way right now. And so your people end up practically swimming in sweet treats from the Pope, and oh, are they ever so pleased.
"Thank you, me lord. Our stomachs will never rumble again."
Your people now have energy, food, and are over the moon with your stellar leadership. Many years go by of great times for your land, with fantastic diplomatic relations with your two neighbours. Until... Destroy them! On guard! Your neighbours start a war with each other. Crap. The Caliph and the Pope both send you a letter each. My friend, come join us in this war. The enemy must pay for their crimes. My friend, come to our aid. To hell we will send them. This suddenly puts you in a very awkward situation. If you aid the Caliph, you'll quickly lose the Pope's food. But if you aid the Pope, you'll quickly lose the Caliph's energy. And you're not going to be able to play neutral for long, as whoever the winner is will certainly remember. Oh well, if war it is, at least you can manufacture some weapons. Wait, you don't have any manufacturing either? Oh, well then, I guess you and your people are just fucked. Self-sufficiency is one of the most important things that a nation can have. Think of national self-sufficiency like the human body. If you lost your heart, you'd die instantly. If you lost your brain, you wouldn't be yourself. And if you lost your lungs, you couldn't breathe anymore. These body parts are your vitals. You need them just to survive. But if you cut some of your hair, trimmed some of your nails, or accidentally lost one of your teeth, well, you'll survive, as these things aren't really vital. And it's the same thing when it comes to countries. Some things, like energy and food, are vital. But things like movies and video games, well, they're cool and all, but we can still live without them. Though a nation should probably still block a lot of outside media if it's a detriment to their people, TikTok, but nevertheless. A nation should prioritise being naturally self-sufficient in its vitals in order to ensure the security of not just itself, but more importantly, its people. And to prove the importance of national self-sufficiency, today I'm going to primarily talk about the recent failures of Europe, whereby we have completely lost control of our energy. As some of you may know, I am genuinely nocturnal. Like some sort of deranged vampire, I can't stand daytime at all. With all its loudness, chaos, and God forbid, people. I do, however, absolutely adore nighttime, mostly as it's so quiet, peaceful, and serene. Thus, it should not come as much of a surprise that my favourite season of them all is the winter. Having the sun rise at just 8 AM, only to fall a few hours later at 4 PM, is a truly underrated blessing for us night owls. Unfortunately, however, the biggest downside of winter is that it gets really bloody freezing. Right now, over here in Manchester, it's currently a whopping -5 degrees Celsius. And you really just can't get colder than that. Oh, well, I guess you can get colder. Much colder. Much, much colder. How is that even possible? But unlike in the past, where you had to huddle around a fire or you'd end up freezing to death from frostbite, today, in the modern era, we have created numerous great technologies to help keep us warm. Radiators, heated floors, electric blankets, you name it, we have it. So I guess suffering from the cold must be a thing of the past, right? Wrong! Because as it turns out, all those sources of warmth require energy to work, whether it be gas, water, or electricity. And, shockingly enough, all three of those resources don't just spawn out of thin air. Though we might take such basic amenities for granted, without energy, we wouldn't be able to properly function as per usual. And putting heating aside for a moment, you would not even be able to use the device you're watching this production on without such energy. Hence, why all nations try their best to have a solid energy infrastructure, so that their citizens never have to go back to the tragic times before we found out how to harness such resources. Well, I say all nations. Your energy account. Your energy payments. You were paying £52.35 per month. Your future payments will be £1,248.90 per month. In the year of our Lord 2022, energy prices started to absolutely soar across much of the Western world, but especially in Europe. According to the OECD, consumer energy prices in 2022 increased by 33% in France, 38% in Germany, 48% in Italy, and a staggering 57% in the UK. I conducted a poll whereby I asked you all, how much has your household's energy bills increased this year? 22% of you said around the same. Another 22% of you said you had a slight increase. 30% of you said you had a notable increase. And 26% of you said you had a huge increase. If we crunch those numbers, that means that 78% of respondents reported an increase in their energy bills. Which begs the question, what's going on here? Well, what's going on is that in early 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. Now, if you're a logical person, you're probably wondering how a war between these two countries could possibly increase energy prices in other countries, which would be a very good question. What if I told you that the European Union is so stupid that just before the invasion, they were importing 41% of their entire gas supply from Russia? I mean, how stupid are these EU politicians? To break this down by country, according to the ACER, the amount of gas that came from Russia was 94% in Finland, 77% in Bulgaria, 70% in Slovakia, and 49% in Germany, just to name a few. Which is, needless to say, an absolutely massive dependency. Now, some of you might say, well, Alex, why'd you call the European Union stupid? I mean, after all, no one could have possibly expected Russia to invade Ukraine. Right? Well, what if I told you that Russia didn't start invading Ukraine in 2022? They started invading Ukraine in 2014. The 2022 invasion is merely a second push inwards. Despite this, however, for 8 years straight, the EU did bugger all to try to become energy independent, and instead just kept huffing the Moscow fumes. And now that Russia has not so unexpectedly started acting up again, only now have they decided, hey, maybe we should become energy independent? Wow, we've got some real Einsteins in Brussels, don't we, folks? So they suddenly stop buying Russian gas, or at least try to, which, not too shockingly, leads to a massive surge in energy prices, due to a sudden higher demand over an even smaller supply. And this means that even countries that weren't dependent on Russian gas, such as the UK, who only had a single-digit percentage point dependence on Russia due to importing their gas from Norway instead, have still had their prices increase, nevertheless. So a question you're probably asking yourself is, well, why was Europe dependent on Russian gas in the first place? And the answer to that is actually very simple. Neoliberal economics. In the EU, economic protectionism, meaning nation-states protecting their own economic interests, is not just strictly frowned upon, but outright illegal under EU law. As all EU nations, by the mere virtue of being in the EU, are forced to join their internal free market, opening up their national economies to foreign investment. The European Union's economic policy is to try to integrate as many countries as possible into becoming economically dependent on each other, even sometimes with other nations outside of the EU, with the idea being that so long as nations rely on each other, they are much less likely to invade each other. The problem with this, however, is obvious. What happens, theoretically, if even in spite of such economic integration, that a country still decides to invade another anyway? And the answer to that is, well, they don't have an answer. Hence why post the invasion, turning on your heating in Europe was like entering a speedrun into bankruptcy.
Hey, everybody go! $1 half.
And these price hikes are even worse in countries that didn't bother to store gas in the first place to prepare for this kind of scenario. According to Sky, Germany stored just 194 terawatt hours of gas storage. Italy, a mere 153. France, a mere 117. And the UK, 10. Which is, needless to say, not a very wise move coming from a country with the worst insulation in Western Europe, whose homes lose heat 3 times quicker than their Norwegian counterparts, partially because no one in Britain actually knows how to build a proper house. Wow, it's almost like storing your own energy and investing in your own infrastructure is actually important. Ironically enough, do you want to know who was one of the only world leaders who saw this mess coming? A man who many people like to mock, ex-US President Donald Trump. Trump, who thinks nationally himself, identified that Germany specifically, as a large European nation, was heavily dependent on Russian gas. And so he complained to NATO that this didn't make any sense.
Germany is totally controlled by Russia because they were getting from 60 to 70% of their energy from Russia and a new pipeline. And you tell me if that's appropriate, because I think it's not. And I think it's a very bad thing for NATO, and I don't think it should have happened. And I think we have to talk to Germany about it. Germany is a captive of Russia because they got rid of their coal plants, they got rid of their nuclear. They're getting so much of the oil and gas from Russia. I think it's something that NATO has to look at. I think it's very inappropriate. You and I agree that it's inappropriate. I don't know what you can do about it now, but it certainly doesn't seem to make sense that they pay billions of dollars to Russia, and now we have to defend them against Russia.
Trump even pointed out this in his speech to the UN back in 2018, whereby he was laughed at directly by the German representatives present.
Reliance on a single foreign supplier can leave a nation vulnerable to extortion and intimidation. Germany will become totally dependent on Russian energy if it does not immediately change course. Here in the Western Hemisphere, we are committed to maintaining our independence from the encroachment of expansionist foreign powers.
Needless to say, they aren't laughing now. Ursula von der Leyen, who at the time was the German defence minister, even mocked his comments and said that she didn't know what he meant by that.
I do not really understand what he means by that. Hard to say.
Years later, and this woman was then given a massive promotion to become the head of the European Commission, the de facto presidential equivalent of the entire European Union. Unelected, of course. And ironically enough, after all this, she now never stops talking about how bad it is to be dependent on Russian gas. What a remarkable transformation. And this really highlights how the European Union actually works. Usually, when you fail, you get fired.
You're fired.
But in the EU, when you fail, you get promoted. Then Europeans are surprised that their countries keep getting worse with every year that passes. It always amuses me how British people blame all of Britain's problems on Brexit, as if being led by these morons would have been any better. The issue was not us leaving them behind, but not replacing our politicians in tandem who also think like them as well. As these imbeciles genuinely have the foresight of a lemon, and it's always we the people who have to pay the price for their incompetence. Turn off lights. Spend less time in the shower. Be savvy in the kitchen. More than 2 million UK households are in debt on their electricity bills. People are already unplugging fridges, washing clothes by hand, and skipping meals, with much worse to come this winter, Citizens' Advice warns. Wow, this neoliberal economic dependence is really working out well, huh? Me growing up in the 90s. I can't wait for flying cars and trips to Mars. Me now in the 20s. I'd better make sure I don't leave my radiator on overnight, or I might go bankrupt. Now, to prevent their citizens from rioting in the streets, European governments have devised a genius plan. Support people paying these extortionate energy bills with direct payments. With Germany handing out £60 billion, Italy £49 billion, France £44 billion, and the UK, hating its own poor as is tradition, a mere £15 billion. What these governments don't say, however, is that all this money doesn't just come out of nowhere, as it will either be 1. Borrowed, which only increases the national debt further, 2. Taxed, which means they're just taking your money and giving it back to you, or 3. Printed, which will only increase inflation and make your money worth even less in the future. AKA, this is like putting on a bandage to cure cancer. But wait, because it somehow gets worse. Now you'd think then that considering money is so tight, that European governments would be spending every penny they have on ensuring the welfare of their citizens. But no. Because while all this is going on, they are also sending billions to Ukraine in the background. According to MSN, France has sent over $1.2 billion, Poland over $2.5 billion, Germany $3.1 billion, and the UK $6.5 billion. Hang on a minute, did I read that right? You're telling me that the country with some of the lowest gas reserves, the worst insulation, and the highest energy bill increases is also sending the most amount of money in Europe overseas? I'm being threatened with a visit from the bailiffs over my gas bill. Let them come, I've got nothing to give.
Slava Ukraini.
I miss the simple things, having a drink or an ice cream. You can't do that on £41 a week.
Slava Ukraini.
I got a £350 cost of living payment. What happens after that? It's hardly going to get me through the winter.
Slava Ukraini.
We live on cereal and soup. I ration washing my hair. What else can I give up to survive?
Slava Ukraini.
Fridges are expensive. This winter I may have to finally turn mine off.
Slava Ukraini.
I'm so cold I live in my bed, like the grandparents in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Slava Ukraini.
And people wonder why I'm not patriotic for the UK. This isn't a country, it's a prostitute. In this nation, where thousands of children live in poverty, where the elderly are left to freeze in the cold, where families are forced to humiliatingly beg in food banks, let it be known that our government willingly made the decision to take by force billions of pounds of taxpayer money and use it not to solve these issues that they themselves created, but to instead fund a war that our nation isn't officially even directly involved in a part of the world that most of our citizens couldn't even point to on a map. While, at the same time, having the audacity to tell its people to make sacrifices for such interventions. A story that is unfortunately true, not just in the UK, but throughout much of Europe too. The UK and the rest of Europe is out of gas, out of time, and soon out of money. But of course, when one does complain about this, the bourgeoisie elite of our nations, that being the unholy combination of the government, the legacy media, and the few middle-class morons still dumb enough to believe them both, will sneer and look down upon you. As if wanting a state that actually puts its citizens first and foremost is some sort of cardinal sin. Which brings us on to the real root cause of this issue. The upper echelons of European society are all devoted neoliberals, which economically means that they have zero loyalty to their nations. As to them, states are naught more than mere empty vessels of business, and to make such trades as easy as can be, they want to tear down as many national barriers as possible. To them, the very idea of national self-sufficiency is an insult, and you mere lowly peasants, daring to demand ownership of vitals to be in public hands rather than being in private hands with them and their crony capitalist friends, is an affront. And there's no better country to prove this than the UK. In the 1970s, the UK publicly owned its water, energy, mail, and transport, had a huge oil reserve, and a national debt of just £80 billion. 50 years later in the 2020s, and our water, energy, mail, and transport are all in private hands, we have busted all our oil reserves and have a national debt of £2.5 trillion, more than 20 times higher. That was then, and this is now. If we take a look at some of Britain's largest energy suppliers, British Gas is owned by a multinational publicly traded company known as Centrica. EDF Energy is owned by the French government. E.ON is owned by a German company. And Scottish Power, despite its name, is owned by a Spanish company. Your nations have been stripped of their assets. Do you not understand that? No, most people don't, because the genius of neoliberals is that yes, while their conservative economics are almost universally detested, because they hide in tandem behind social progressivism, the West's newfound religion, they have made themselves almost immune to criticism. In this case, they masquerade by covering themselves in Ukrainian flags, parading around as if they are moral crusaders. Boris Johnson, ex-disgraced Prime Minister of the UK, says, "Stand in solidarity with Ukraine this Christmas. Switch off your festive lights. Show your support." Boris, I hate to break it to you, pal, but I think that because of your energy policies, that British people can't afford to turn their festive lights on in the first place. Hey fool, don't focus on the fact that your nation has been asset stripped. Don't focus on the fact that you're paying more than ever in bills. Don't focus on the fact that your country is in more debt than it has money. Focus on those Russians instead. Nurses are going on strike over not getting enough pay. Tell them that they're playing into Putin's hands. Yes, this really happened. So what they've done here is taken something that's genuinely tragic, such as the Ukraine war, and transmogrified it into saying that complaining about energy price rises, national dependence, and the intentional asset stripping of our nations is the equivalent of supporting the invasion. When in reality, it isn't. But what this war has done is expose the failure of neoliberal policies firsthand. Dear viewer, have you ever noticed how there's a massive class divide between those who despise neoliberalism and those who support it? This is because the poor of Europe understand full well how much they've been robbed, as they rely on our dying public sector services, and see firsthand how run down they are. Whereas the trust fund wealthy sneer down at them, snapping at them for daring to complain at how they've been robbed, completely and utterly disconnected from the harsh realities of neoliberal economic policy. These people are simply unfit to lead. Hence, why the only way to fix this issue is to replace such neoliberal swines with a strong national government that exclusively has loyalty to the people of said nation. No links to large corporations, no links to multinational unions, no links to any and all but the people they swore to serve. And what would this competent leadership do instead? Simple. Become nationally self-sufficient by developing appropriate renewable energy infrastructure on your home soil and depleting the last of one's fossil fuels in a timely and orderly manner. Because all nations should be nationally self-sufficient when it comes to their energy, just they become reliant on their enemy, making them vulnerable to blackmail or outside influences beyond their control, such as wars. And what has occurred here in Europe with our energy will be a lesson in that to the world. But as I said, energy is just one of the vitals, and it isn't just Europe that's been affected by this. You also have food, which certain countries in Africa heavily rely on overseas imports, due to, so I'm told by the people within such nations, equally corrupt politicians that refuse to properly invest in local trading infrastructure. But there's also manufacturing, whereby countries like the United States essentially handed over their entire industry over to rival countries such as China, because their corporate elite would rather make money ripping off overseas workers than paying domestic ones a living wage. Both of which probably deserve their own productions in of themselves, as they are likewise just as bad as Europe's energy crisis. But nevertheless, in my view, it's not enough to just fix the mess that neoliberals made. There must also be justice. When you sign up to become a politician of a nation, you are swearing loyalty to its citizens, with the aim of making their lives better. Likewise, when you present yourself as a member of the media, you swear an oath of truth to the people. But if, after making these agreements, you choose to betray them to benefit yourself, then as far as I'm concerned, you have committed treason. Hence why I believe that any neoliberal who benefited from committing treason to their own people should be forced to pay back the profits they stole via a payback fund. Any individual of influence who knowingly assisted in the asset stripping of their nations should be asset stripped themselves, losing their houses, bank accounts, trust funds, and any and all objects they own, in order to be sold and put soundly within this payback fund. Naturally, however, this will only be a drop in the bucket to the billions of pounds, euros and dollars lost from destroying such national self-sufficiency. Therefore, as a token gesture of justice, such people should thus be imprisoned, whereby they will undergo manual labour for the rest of their days, working tirelessly to pay back their debt to society. Because the way I see it is, if you stole from your nation, then you pay back to your nation. This payback fund, what little it would be then spent on those who became victims during these times of theft. To all those who lost a loved one due to poor heating. To all those who had to go a time without food. To all those who lost a job overseas. You are entitled to reparations and should get what you are due. Voting out the neoliberals, sentencing them to the justice they deserve, and then fixing the mess they made. This is what must be done. Because a nation that is not self-sufficient is not really a nation at all. Alright folks, I hope you enjoyed that. Yeah, the intentional asset stripping of our nations and how neoliberal economics kind of makes us purposely dependent on nations which should be our enemies, like Russia and China, on paper at least, is absurd. Now, how can you call yourself a nation if you're not even in control of your own energy, your own food, your own manufacturing? You're not a nation, you're just a plot of land with a flag. You know, you're just a historical artifact at that point. And what we see in the European Union especially is that firsthand. I mean, I can't believe that more people don't talk about this, to be honest with you. And what has happened here is proof that this economic theory is an absolute disaster. Nevertheless, I'd like to give a shout out to the Wall of Famers, specifically Roland Manhertz, for his increased pledge. Thank you very much, sir. I am genuinely ever so grateful. These names on your screen here, ladies and gentlemen, are the people who brought you this production. If it wasn't for them, I would not be doing this. Keep that in mind. You should have your name there. Get your name on here. Come on. Head on over to Patreon. Nevertheless, folks, I think that events such as these will bring neoliberal economics into question and bring national self-sufficiency to the forefront where it should never have left. Well, either that or people keep voting for the same tired old neoliberal nonsense, which is all that people seem to do whether they're left-wing or right-wing these days, but nevertheless, I remain optimistic. I mean, people don't really have a choice. They'll either vote for it now or they'll vote for it in the future when things are much worse. Either way, neoliberalism will come to an end. The question is, do you want to suffer more or less? I prefer less, so come on, can we get a move on, please? Can we get rid of neoliberalism? Thank you very much. Either way, folks, I'll see you next time.